Okay, this is great. This is where it gets to be really fun because we can start making pretty pictures. And the first thing I want to do, because I like this frame right now, just is kind of a beginning to everything. But I want to be able to move around the image and tweak the lights and everything. And I'm not going to be able to come back to this all the time in the exact same way. So what I want to do first is just drop a camera in. So I drop one in, and you see these yellow dots right now because it's selected. Now if I zoom out, you can see the actual camera. Now I'm not looking through it. These crosshairs right here aren't selected. So if I click on this, it'll go into the camera view that it'll look through the camera. If I click on it again, turn it off, I can go back around the scene and do stuff and then come back to this shot and see how it looks. So I like dropping cameras in just to have a perspective that's saved, basically, that I can keep coming back to and see the changes. So I'm going to, first of all, drop a light in. And what I like to do first, my favorite type of light is an area light. So I'll drop that in. You can see how that changes the scene already. If I bring it up, you can see how it mimics light in the scene, so you can start kind of seeing where this goes. It's kind of nice. And if I hit render, you see that, which is not that good, really, but it's okay. It's the very beginning of a light. So one thing that's happening, as you can see in the rendered image, is there's a line right here. This line is the area light, and there's a back to it and a front to it. And just as a good rule of thumb, using the Y or the Z axis is a good place to just kind of know that light's being emitted from this direction. Even though an area lights is being emitted from both sides, I like to use the Z axis as the reference for emitting light. So what I want to do is rotate this light using the Z axis as a guide and try to point this light at the beer bottle to give it the focus of the scene. But if I move it this way and I have to rotate it, move it again, and then rotate it if I want to get the right placement, it can be really annoying to have to constantly move and rotate lights as you put them around the scene. So there's a really useful tag that Cinema's provided called the target tag. And what that does is you can put the tag on any object, but lights are the best. So the tag is right here. So if I go to the light in the object manager, right click and do Cinema 4D tags, and you can see all these different kinds of tags, but don't worry about all of them right now. If I go to Cinema 4D tags and then down here into target, you see it gets added right here as a tag. And then inside the attributes of this tag, there's the target object field. And I can just drop anything in there, null objects or anything in this object manager I can drop into as a target object. So I'm going to drop the null object right here of all three of these that make up the beer bottle, and I'm just going to drop it in like that. You see how it jumped right there. Now if I move this around with just the move tool, it always points to the beer bottle. It's incredibly useful. It saves a ton of time. And also at the same time, if I move the object that is the target, if I move that, the lights will move as well. So I love having the target object tag in Cinema because I can just move lights around now really easily to get the right placement. pretty humongous right now, this light, which is okay, but it's easy to just resize this. I kind of like tall and skinny lights, so I'm going to do that. I'll move it to the front of the scene, right behind the camera, and like that. And now if I render right now, it looks really bad. It's because there's no shadows turned on. Now if I go to the light object and go to the general tab right here, right, you can see shadow is turned to none. And if I just do shadow maps or soft, I hit render, okay, you sort of see shadows, but they're not very accurate right here. I'm going to make sure that this bottle is actually on the ground, and it is. So the shadow is okay. I mean, this is not accurate. So if I go back to the light and I change the shadow to ray traced hard and do that, those are the types of shadows that ray traced does. Now, like, that's obviously not what we want for this, but it's really nice that it renders really quickly. And once you get to have like larger scenes with multiple lights casting shadows, you're not going to want every light to be casting the highest quality shadow, which is the next shadow called area right here. Area shadows. Now if I hit render, looks very nice because it's accurate. It does a thing where as objects are closer to the things they intersect, the shadows are sharper, and then as they get farther away from the things that they're intersecting and casting shadows on, they get more diffused. And also scale matters a lot in area shadows as well. So it's the nicest shadow, and it looks very nice. So this is great to have. I'm going to stick to the area shadows because I like them so much. And I'm going to go back to the camera view, and I'm going to hit render. There's at least a little bit more of a nice image coming out right now. And what I want to do too, just right now real quick, is just move this light over. It's a little bit too direct. Let me just like that. Rotate it just a little bit. And this is really just a reference light right now. We're not going to be doing the full quality render and staging at this point. We're going to have a light in the scene so that we can see how this glass material looks, how these other materials will look with the textures. So we're just kind of, it's reference right now, but it's still, will be nice to look nice while we do it. So that's okay. That's a good way to start with the glass material. I'm going to do one more thing with the light just to show you how I like to set my lights up. Okay, so I'm going to go to the light, go to the details tab right here, and right now fall off is set to none, which means light just, even though it does end up going to pure darkness, farther away, this is not a realistic way that light falls off. And when I turn fall off to inverse square, which they say is physically accurate, I do that, and now this happens. Now if I hit render, it's really bad because the fall off distance right here, the radius / decay, is so large. Now when I'm in object mode, these handles show up to interactively set the radius or decay of the fall off. So this is great because then it gives you kind of a real world scale to work with on your image and with your lights. And it's just one more thing that adds just one little more touch of realism when all those touches together make a really great render. So if I just kind of do that, put it right there. The best part about fall off that I like is you don't have to mess with intensity at all of the light. You can still obviously mess with it if you want, but the best way to make it light more or less intense is really just to mess with the fall off distance. It's really nice. So now I'll hit render. And you can see the intensity is greater here, and it falls off very naturally um, in this scene. And if I reduce the fall off distance, now you can see how that adds a lot of realism to your scene. So I'm just going to increase this a little bit, not a whole lot. It's already starting to look pretty nice. Okay. Start here. It's getting better slowly. So I just want to show you how I like to set lights up and how they're going to be set up later when we do the final render. I'm going to change these shadows back to ray traced hard so that the scene, look how fast the scene renders now. It goes much faster now that the shadows are different. Area shadows add a lot of render time, which is always the rule of thumb. When it's pretty, it takes a long time to render. So we'll start with that, and I'm just going to go down here, double click an empty area in this materials manager, and it makes a new material. Double click that, and this will become the bottle glass for the glass bottle. I'll drag that on to the model so we can see it changing as we make it. And the first thing to do is don't worry about this color at all. Actually, make it pure white. And then we're going to check the transparency checkbox, and you'll see how that disappears right here. Now, nothing really happens right now, and what I'm going to do is turn on this thing called the interactive render region. It's very useful, super useful. Gives you just a window into the scene that will render, and as you can see, it renders the scene, and that's fine, pretty quickly, because what's going on here is there's this little arrow right here. And this is the quality of the render. And you can go all to the bottom. That means, as you can see, once I render this, very pixelated, but also very fast. And as this gets dragged up, the quality gets better until, if you go all the way to the very top, that's a full quality render. So I like having this on probably really just around the middle right now because we're doing very rough material stuff. And I'm going to actually turn off the 6-pack case. So you can see what's going on here. It's a transparent object, but there's still reflectance going on. If I turn the reflectance off, it really is transparent. It's invisible. Reflectance is going to be it's always really important. But what's going on here is there's no refraction set. Refraction is set to 1, which means light passes through this object uninterrupted, and that's not the case. Now in future versions of Cinema, there are presets for refraction, but what we're going to do is the old school way and just ask Google what the glass index of refraction is, and it's just a number. Right here. So if we go down to G, glass, 1.5. Let's do not 1.5, let's do albite. 1.489 is the IOR, or the index of refraction for glass. This is a universal number for all objects. So we can type that in here. It is 1.489. As long as you have your scale right, this will behave like in the real world. Okay, so let's see how this looks. It's okay right now. Glass is going to look really nice when a couple other things are turned on in the render settings. One thing that needs to be turned off right now, which I'm not really sure why Cinema has it by default, but the exit reflections need to be turned off. And what that means is there's a reflection as the light rays come in and a reflection as the light rays go out. And typically in objects like hollow glass, like bottles and wine glasses and things, it looks really fake. So if I uncheck that, you won't see a change right now, but it'll make a difference in a little bit. Okay, so it's like not a huge, it's not really like a big deal right now because there's a couple other things going on here. You can see how it does refract light. If I do that and do that, you can see how it's refracting light. That's really nice. But it looks really bad. If I turn this all the way up to full quality and render, it's like pixelated and this reflection is not realistic. So the first thing I want to do, because the default reflectance is usually not, it's basically never good. It needs to always be tweaked. So we go to reflectance, and if we go to the default specular, right now it's set to blend, which, sorry blend, it's not that good. I like to always do GGX. I think it's a great standard reflectance. So we can leave it at additive. We can turn the roughness down because, as you can see, it gets sharper and sharper as the roughness goes down. Now if I turn this back up again, you can see how it adds that softness, which is almost kind of like maybe brushed glass or something, but we're not doing that. We're doing real glass. Okay, it's not too bad right there. And the glass obviously reflects a lot, and by default the reflection strength is set to 0. So this is actually the specular strength, and if I turn this up, you can see how this will get brighter. So specular is actually light as it hits the object, and reflection is light that comes in from other parts of the scene. So now if I turn the reflection strength up, it's not really going to change a lot right now because the scene itself, as I hit render the whole thing, the scene itself is empty. There's nothing to reflect. So we'll change that in the future. But reflection strength, obviously with glass is very reflective. The specular strength of this glass, you can set that. I like to keep it low, but I do think glass at least starts around 30%. And this is all stuff that you can tweak on your own taste. But I do like how this looks right now. I'm going to extend this all the way to the bottom. We can see how this whole render looks. I'm going to show you one thing too that I like to do as well. By default, for some reason, when you go to the light settings and details, this is not checked, show and reflection. And so this stuff right here are actually just the light rays that are emitted out of the light, but it doesn't show the shape of the light by default. So if I check that, you can see how it'll change. And you can actually change you can multiply the visibility of the light as it shows up in the reflection. So if I do that, and then if I turn this off, I go out here and I change the shape of this light, like if I go like this and make it very wide like that, I go back to the camera, turn back the interactive render region, you can see how it's been changed. If I turn this off, so I turn off show and reflection, that's what it looks like before. Turn it back on, and it shows up like that. Now these dots, a little bit annoying. What they are these samples of the light that come out, that are emitted from the light, and how they And with highly reflective objects, especially with glass, you're going to see those things. These are the samples of the light as they are emitted. And you can turn this up to 200. You can see how these dots, these samples will increase. Of course, the render time increases. But also at the same time, the accuracy of the light as it gets emitted increases as well. So that's also a trade-off. I'm going to just take this back down to 40. I'm actually going to do 60. And then show in the render, which means it means like this. So it actually will show up as a light in the render. If that's turned off, it'll look like that. It'll just be invisible. So I like having these on because this is how it would look. This is what would happen in a real studio. You would have a light and it would emit light, and it would be a physical object and would have to be dealt with. It couldn't just be invisible. So right away, that's starting to look pretty nice actually as a glass bottle. Obviously the shading is not that cool, so I'm gonna go back just for fun and change the shadows back to area just so we can see what it looks like. You can see how it's crawling along. That's partly my computer and partly the samples from the light and the area shadows working together. Okay, so this is a little bit obviously not accurate. It's a transparent object, but it still has to, it's still going to emit shadows, or it's still going to cast shadows onto the thing, even though it's technically a transparent object. Now, one thing I've learned really is to just, even though it is glass and you look at glass as mostly completely transparent except for the refraction, I would change this brightness down from 100% to maybe like 95. Because that's what happens. See, as you bring the brightness down, that means the amount of transparency in the object. And this color right here is this color in the color channel. So you can do that if you want. I'm going to keep it around white as clear glass. This is obviously not, this is too low of a brightness. I think really just 95% transparent will start to cast a shadow on this object, which ends up being a lot more realistic. Okay, so I did that. Very little bit of shadow was started being cast, and the render time really increased. So this will get better as we change the render settings in the future. So for right now, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to take this back up to, I guess, 98%. And just to make this easier on the computer, I'm going to take the light settings back to actually just soft shadow maps, and these samples down to 40 again. Let's get in there. I mean, it's a nice glass, I think. It's a pretty good starting point. Now, we're going to get to this paper texture for this label in a little bit, but I'm going to do something kind of fun right now. This beer bottle cap is really bad because we haven't messed with the reflectance of this material yet. So let's do that, make it nice and shiny like a bottle cap is. I'm going to double click on the bottle cap and go to reflectance, and once again by default it's blend, which is not cool. We go to GGX, take the roughness down to just a little bit. Nothing's really ever 0% roughness. And the reflection strength up. Okay, so that's the reflection strength and the specular strength coming in. That's way too much. So we can do a low specular strength and maybe even just a low reflection strength too. But just enough to get it shiny to show the light. Well, either way, this is where the bottle cap material will be set. Okay, that's fine for now, at least. I'll come back to that once the render settings get changed later on. But at least we have a little bit of some shininess added. We'll come back, and this won't change. This will just, these numbers will get tweaked a little bit once an environment gets dropped in and everything. And I'm going to go in and do the paper texture in the next section for the label. But for now, this is what the bottle looks like. It's not too bad. It's getting there. Okay, see you in the next section.